Hopefully everybody's had a good summer holiday season. Many of the people we're talking to are now starting to go from holiday and think about planning and territories and all the good things that come with that. So we thought it would be a good opportunity to tell a story of a company called Watershed and their RevOps hero, Trevor Hussey, who's joining me on the call today, about how territory design can be great and it can be a competitive advantage. And you can kind of carve through all of this negativity and the bad vibes that are often associated with territory. So today's presentation is called Turning Territory Design into a Delight. And I'm Kevin, I'm the CEO of BoogieBoard. We're a territory design software and consulting firm. And Trevor, if you want to maybe just introduce yourself.
Yeah, Trevor Hussey, RevOps at Watershed. Been in RevOps for the last 6 years or so. Been at Watershed for 2 years almost now. And yeah, I love this topic. It's obviously super top of mind for us right now as we approach Q3, Q4, and then as we plan for next year. So hoping the audience gets a lot of value out of this conversation. Um, I'll say a weird hobby of mine is I like you, Kevin. I don't have many weird hobbies. I have two young kids, but I am a proud Girl Scout of the US of A as my daughter's troop leader. I usually get some giggles out of that one. Um,
Feels like a scam where you're getting some cookies under the table or something like this. Can
yeah,
you clarify?
yeah, I'm Daisy troop leader. That's it. They needed help, and so yeah, I run meetings. The best part is like asking open-ended questions and listening to what these kindergartners have to say. It's my favorite part.
Nice.
I will drop the cookie link. I love that idea. Shall we get into it, Kevin?
Let's do it. So
Let's do
let's
it.
let's frame the conversation by talking about how Watershed turned territory design into a delight. We're going to go through the whole story in a minute. I wanted you to get some ethos through which you can kind of view this presentation. The first is by delivering an amazing stakeholder experience, not just a normal good job for the stakeholders. There's a ton of people involved in this process, and we're going to show how Trevor went above and beyond to make sure that those relationships and those partnerships within Watershed are oiled and moving in the way that they need to reach the company's goals. The second tenet is beautiful project management. We encounter a lot of companies that are strapped, and so they just jump right into territory planning. All of a sudden, they're in spreadsheets, and there's not a lot of organization or method to the madness. We're going to encourage you, even if you get forced into that situation, on how to jump out and create a beautiful process that your company can be proud of and will ultimately help you to have a better time. And the last is by really having a deep understanding of what territories are and what they can do for your business. Trevor mentions that territories are where the rubber meets the road on planning season, and I kind of love that. We talk about it's how a business divides and conquers by understanding what a territory is and the challenges associated with it. You can invite some of the potential conflicts upstream and run a beautiful process, a delightful process, even. And so, with that, I'm going to invite Trevor to talk a little bit about Watershed as a company and some of its growth.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I'll just ground us in like Watershed's mission here, and then hopefully we can relate that to everyone else on the call and the pressures that you're facing. Our mission at Watershed is really to be the neck that steers the head in decarbonizing the global economy, regardless of what you believe about climate change and the climate crisis. It is an existential problem that we're all faced with right now, and the global economy is starting or in the midst of mobilizing to solve it and working with so enterprises, the world's largest companies, have an outsized impact on that mission. So the way our mission is by 2030 to remove 500 megatons, which is about 1% of the total global emissions of CO2 from the Earth's atmosphere by 2030. That is the mission. That's what we drive towards. That's what kind of gets us up in the morning. Um, in order to meet this mission, we have to partner with the largest, most complex enterprises in the world. To give you a step back on our growth trajectory, we were founded in 2018. Today we have about 400 employees and we're Series C. Sales team is about 50 AEs, 25 SDRs, 2 account managers, and we're strapped. We at the time that that we're going to contextualize here in 2023, going into 2024 planning, we had 3 teammates on the RevOps team and a deal desk. So we really had to, we didn't have a lot of time. We were running a million directions at once. So we'll get into some of the pains that followed there.
Yeah, and as an entrepreneur, it's awesome when you get to work with a company like Watershed. We think that we focus on kind of an inevitable problem with territories. But you go to sleep at night and you say, oh, territory design, how much does it matter? But then, you see a really positive company who's willing to try to achieve these amazing things in growth and how territories can help them. So we've been really pleased to kind of work with Watershed in that capacity as they look to tackle an inevitable problem. But before
Yeah,
they do that, sorry, go ahead, Trevor.
one thing I'll say, Kevin, is like, yes, we're working on an existential problem, but we're all faced, all the revenue operators on this call are faced with pressures to grow and scale the business, and with varying degrees there and from different angles, but hoping we can relate this to everyone else on the call as well. Okay, carry on.
Unfortunately, I think everybody on the call is going to relate to this next section. So Trevor,
Yeah.
it's hard, but if you can take us back to 2023, and more specifically tell us what it is you were trying to do, and we'll get into how you did it.
Yeah, for sure. So going into, like in the midst of 2024 planning, rewind, what was that, 8 months ago? We, because of our growth objectives, we know we needed to expand into different geographies. We needed to double the sales team. With that growth, we really had to have like super tight rules of engagement and then territory definitions to like minimize conflict and also just maximize the rep utilization or chances for reps to hit quota within each of those pods and territories, which is really the ultimate RevOps problem to solve. That's why we're here. So territories, as Kevin said, is really just how the rubber hits the road. And like you're taking the growth objectives to the annual plan and then baking that into operational day-to-day processes with how we carve accounts, how we carve territories. So that's how we think about it at Watershed.
So 2023, you had to do this huge territory design effort to facilitate a number of goals. You had a million things going on. Tell us about how you actually started.
Yeah, if we can just get a quick chat from the group on like how many of y'all use spreadsheets, or at least recently have used spreadsheets to carve territories, be a good gauge for what we're working with here. But within this context, walking into 2024 or 2023, carving these territories, I have some scar tissue from previous carves, and I know that it just takes a while, and like we're spreadsheet based at the time, and so I knew I just didn't have a whole lot of time to just as you say, present or let unfold a beautiful project management experience. I just had to jump into it, which is what happened here. It's some things that these are like the typical ways that someone's going to carve a territory. You export a cow list from the CRM with all the attributes you need. We dumped that into Google Sheet. At Watershed, we value transparency, collaboration, so Google Sheet is great. But with that comes a lot of constraints on calculations and computation and et cetera. It makes it pretty slow and painful. So you export it, we put it into Google Sheet, and then I performed manual data transformations. If there was gaps in the data or the data was a little dirty, you paint over that, if you will, in the Google Sheet, and then do any sort of manual tiering that maybe you don't have in the CRM yet that you're baking into the Google Sheet, and then you're building pivot tables to view, like balancing and such. And then when it comes to actually balancing, I wasn't able to balance over a wide array of attributes because of just the pain that I was feeling on the spreadsheet. Like, I'd make a change to a transformation, copy it down all the rows, wait literally 20 minutes for the sheet to load, go check Slack, get pulled into a meeting. An hour and a half later, I come back to the sheet, and it's like the context switching was just ridiculous. So I could really only balance off like one or two attributes, didn't have time or the space capacity to balance, to get granular and scientific on the balancing there.
Yeah, I remember this from my experience too. And it inevitably ends with RevOps person sitting in spreadsheets, usually late at night, like usually during the holidays is often when this is happening. And you're like the unwanted king or queen maker saying, you get this account, you get this account, you get this account. It feels really arbitrary. And I think the recipients of the territory tend to kind of feign at that sometimes as well.
You sound like Oprah, Kevin.
Yeah, an unwanted Oprah paid slightly less than Oprah as well. Get that someday. So Trevor, you did all that manual work. This is you. This is not a team of people. This is you doing all those things, doubling sales, doubling the size of the sales org, opening a new market. How did you feel going through those pain points?
Yeah, super painful. I'm seeing some pain communicated in the thread as well, or the chat. But I mentioned data transformations just take forever in Google Sheets. It was just killing the work, like my workflow. Context switching from like back and forth. There's just what could take X amount of time, you like have to triple that to account for the spreadsheet. Because of those constraints, it was like, the guess and check, going back in between tabs to check balancing. So like, oh, here's 200 accounts, good for the counts. Let me spread these across 3 reps, what have you, and then checking the pivot table. We're a little off on this other attribute, and then going back and tweaking. It's just like super painful. I'm hoping that this is painting a picture and other people can relate here, because it's pretty common. The the like implication of all of this is like, really we just had to say no to more things as a RevOps team, like way more impactful, way more meaningful things, both as a company, as a team, and also as a person. Like, I do not want to be like jockeying a spreadsheet all day for 4 weeks, whatever, however long it'll take. So just it's pretty demoralizing. And then also doesn't give a good stakeholder experience. Like, you pass a spreadsheet over to the sales leaders, and you like, they see that your balancing is pretty fast and loose, and it's like, it feels like that's just kind of a given. Like, all right, yeah, like there's like, you can't make this an exact science. So like, understand that we have to be fast and loose on these other attributes, but it really just erodes trust in stakeholders. It doesn't make me feel like a high class operator passing over this like subpar work.
Yeah, I think a lot of people on this call can probably resonate with that. We actually ran a series of office hours last year during the end of the year for territories, and I joke that we should have just ran a support group, because it's just really hard. Unfortunately, Trevor's experience is not unique. I experienced this, as did my co-founders, that eventually led to us to start a business. But zooming out to sort of deconstruct some of the elements that are leading to Trevor's experience. The first is that there are way more cooks in the kitchen than people realize. I think when it comes to territories, you've got a ton of stakeholders. You've got sales leaders who need to make quota, they need accounts to do it, and they're competitive. They have no control over the process, so they're going to pull for the accounts and for their team success, and they should. Same with sellers. I've been in direct sales, and those accounts make up your life, not just whether or not you're going to hit quota, but how you spend your day is those accounts. So, they're right to be arguing and pulling for the correct accounts if they don't think there's a good process in place. You have ops leaders, you've got ops analysts, you've got systems related teammates, CRM admins, admins of other tools, lead routing tools that want to work with you on Formatting, often you might not have access to those tools to the extent that you should, and it can cause massive delays. You got people in your planning squad, finance, accounting, and other, who are going to have opinions for you. They're also going to have inputs like how many reps you can have, what's the number, great relation to your overall planning process. And then you've got other customer facing roles that nobody talks about. You might have hundreds of solutions engineers. You might have hundreds of technical account managers or tens, but just like the sellers, just like the sales leaders, they're equally impacted by the accounts that they have to work. So this all kind of grows to an emotional experience where you get pulled in a lot of different directions by people who rightfully care a lot about the territory that they get assigned. The next is that not only do you have all of these different stakeholders, but you've got a negative mindset floating over your organization. I call it the "our data is bad" mindset. And the scope of this webinar is not to talk about actually preparing and normalizing your data for territory planning. We're going to talk a little bit more about that at the end, but this is actually just about the attitude related to your account data. We ran a survey with almost 600 respondents, and over 90% of them were either dissatisfied or indifferent about their account data. And when we started doing consulting engagements, I was surprised that every company we talked to, like really advanced companies, would say, "You're not going to believe how bad our data is." Before they would let us into their CRM, they'd say, we're really sorry. Like you're not going to get it. It was like they were letting us into an unclean house. Like, no, we've seen it all before. We understand. But there was this just really pessimistic attitude. And I liken it to Steph Curry, who's one of the greatest basketball players in the world, on the right of us being like, "Hey, Steph, it'd be really great if you made 100% of your 3-pointers. You're only making 40% right now. Just not good enough. It's not going to cut it." And so there's this mindset and expectation that account data is going to be perfect, but it's a much harder problem than that. And RevOps is doing a ton to move towards perfection on that problem. But those results and that attitude is not making its way to sales. So we're going to recommend some things later about how you can communicate all that you're doing to your sales team and get them a little more empathetic with your data set. Not only do you have a ton of stakeholders, not only do you have bad data perception, but there's a ton of changing variables in this process. You might be like Matt Damon in Good Will Hunting, staring at the board. I think he's actually able to figure it out. So maybe you are, maybe you aren't. I'm not. But you have segments, verticals, account scores, fairness, customer churn, new reps, new markets. Like it's actually a huge math problem once you put all these things together. How do I design territories? And then you have this major caveat on the right side of the screen that says, okay, make all these changes, but do it in the least disruptive way possible. So limit change, which again, is just a really hard math problem. And to do it, you're given a spreadsheet. And a spreadsheet is great for a lot of this stuff. And we're going to recommend spreadsheet work to solve some of the problems related to this. But it's not great for project management. It's not great for keeping people on task and collaborating. You end up with stakeholders trying to participate in the process, like this dude trying to dump into Double Dutch, which after I saw this GIF, it's now in every one of my presentations because I just find it funny. But it also feels like a sales leader at the end of the year trying to say, "Hey, I need to participate in territory planning, and here's what actually happens." And this, of course, was me, which is why I started BoogieBoard. I was a sales rep complaining that my territory wasn't fair, as every sales rep does. I was then a sales leader. I would say this data is terrible. Our delays are killing us. What the heck? And then I became a revenue operator. I got a look under the hood, and I became the person sitting alone in a spreadsheet at night during the holidays, moving accounts from one person to the other, saying, "Whoa, this actually sucks. We need to change this. It can't be this way." And so we ended up working with a really hopeful company and a really hopeful revenue operator who were able to say, "You know what, there is a better way." So Trevor, maybe you can talk about, you already went through a number of the pains and kind of why you would think about making a change, but there was a specific time where you had an internal survey and some stakeholders requested changes more specifically.
Yeah. So, it was like the end of Q1, and we had just gone through this terrible process that we painted a picture about earlier. carving territories, and certain teams or region were behind their number, and territories was like the number one cited reason. We talked about our data is bad mindset. That was part of it, but also just like the inequity across reps, and it was in fact true that there were a good amount of accounts that were not carved, that were left behind, and so that was not a good look for us, to say the least. So we had to make a change.
And so, you engage with us, but you already had a plan in place. So maybe you can talk about some of the things that you were trying to do more specifically.
Yeah. So we you know obviously want, like, the goal of territories, like one of the first principles here is to just like get super tight equity. Really hard to do with manual tools like a sheet. But that is always a first principle. Varying degrees on how well you do on this principle within each carve, but that was definitely one of the goals. Better focus on the right accounts. I mentioned the Watershed's mission earlier. There's a lot of regulations coming out that is forcing companies to buy a carbon accounting solution, which is our sweet spot. So like the time is now. There's a market moment that we need to hit, that we need to capture, and it's super imperative that we meet the moment, if you will. So focusing on the right accounts is huge. Tighten territory definitions, growing a sales team, having more complex go-to-market motion. Need to have tighter territory definitions and ROE, and then just leveraging the machines. Like I just wanted to get out of like the manual spreadsheet monkey game. So that was my other principle.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love the first one because it shows how much Watershed kind of cares about its sellers and its sales leaders. Like, I don't think people often associate territories with being a retention exercise, but as a former sales rep, like it absolutely is. It's a manifestation of kind of how well you're being put in a position to succeed.
Yeah.
So with that, we're about to now walk through the really specific process of what Watershed and BoogieBoard did to actually design territories in a delightful way. And so as we go through this, Watershed did use BoogieBoard as a backend technology for portions of this process, but we're recommending a process that is not dependent on using BoogieBoard. So we'll substitute in spreadsheets in some areas where we may have used BoogieBoard, and offer some simplicity to help you with that. We're also going to have a number of resources that I'll introduce at the end of the presentation to help you to facilitate this specific process within your company. And this process is derived from a number of consulting and software engagements that we had when we started our company and decided, hey, we need to design territories for as many companies as possible. And so step one is related to the project management, the beautiful project management that we've been talking about. And that's to tactically prepare your stakeholders. The first thing you need to do is decide what's on the table. What's essential versus not essential? If you think about the Goodwill Hunting image, if you have all those variables in flight all the time, you're never going to be able to come to an answer. You need to shrink the conversation and to say, what are we actually trying to do here, and what are we willing to take on? You also have to make project management simple by avoiding the double Dutch guy, trying to participate but falling on the ground. It feels simple to say, but most companies get this wrong. Identifying really clear roles and responsibilities. Use a RACI chart, DAISY chart. There's a million of these in the project hub that we're going to give you. You can assign different roles to stakeholders, but is a sales rep allowed to ping you and say, hey, I want to keep this account in my name? Is a sales leader allowed to do the same? You got to have clear responsibilities to make for an easy to partake in process. You need a house for all of this, which is the project hub, which I'm going to show you in a minute, and we'll give you one that you can just go and duplicate online in Notion. And the last is related to the Steph Curry analogy. I recommend writing an open letter to your sales team that says, here's all that we're doing to make your account data experience amazing. We're investing money, we're investing time. Here's how you can participate to help us. We have a template that you can use to go online and do that as well. But I think you'll actually be shocked by how empathetic salespeople and sales leaders can be once they understand, oh, wow, look at all they're doing for our account data. This is why it's a difficult problem. We now get it. Like, let's stop saying our data is bad and move forward.
Yeah, if I could just plug in there, Kevin. So decide what's on the table. This part is definitely crucial. It should come from the annual plan and the rules of engagement. If you don't already have one, then definitely work on the ROE. But uh, there's a number of different attributes at any point you can balance on, or like, criteria to build the carves on. Uh, Landing on the essentials is crucial to get alignment from all the stakeholders. Uh, I like to say an analogy of like, get all the fingerprints on the gun before you start, before you pull the trigger. So it's like everyone is aligned, everyone has provided input. Also allow them to take ownership on how the carves are set. And then the account data strategy for sales bit. You touched on empathy, and this is definitely one that, to help like ease the concerns over our data is bad mindset, is just having like, when all of these data issues pop up, like they're usually like individual accounts, like no data is perfect, and helping your sales team or, your stakeholders understand like, hey, we're fighting like an impossible problem here of there's no such thing as perfect data. What we say at Watershed is our data is 85 to 90% accurate, and that's enough to make decisions on territory decisions, segmentation decisions, etc. So like kind of confronting that fact, not like trying to say that your data is perfect, because it's not going to be. Helping build that empathy across the org is helpful.
Here's Steph Curry from the free throw line, not even the 3-point line. Love that. So this is an example of what the planning hub looks like. It's got a lot of the calendars, tasks, objectives. If you don't know how to use Notion, you can take similar concepts, pull it out into whatever tool it is that you like to use. We also would be grateful if you want to crowdsource and make some comments as to ways we can make this better. We want it to be a good tool for the co-op. So we'll send all that out afterwards. The second step in the process is to really clearly define balance goals and locking criteria. We call balance goals the goals for how you're balancing territories. We encounter a lot of companies that do not have a clear definition of what is a good territory. And so we recommend using your ideal customer profile or attributes about your accounts to determine your desired balance goals. I've got an example on the left side of the screen there from our tool. This is something you would write in the project hub is, hey, we want to have a balanced number of accounts. We want those to be balanced across account score. We want reps to have a certain number of time zones. And when you give a clear measuring stick to your business of what a good territory is, it makes that equity conversation a lot simpler. And Watershed did a great job of this. They leveraged inputs from executives and from sales. And I think this is a really good opportunity for RevOps to engage with leadership and say, hey, we're kind of informing the direction of the business here. Like, we're picking the accounts that we go after. It's really fundamental. Like, who are your top 10? And you can have a really good alignment and directional conversation with leadership. And Trevor, I know you did a lot related to the balance goals within Watershed. It was actually, I think, like the clearest definition of balance that we've ever seen from the companies that we've worked with.
Yeah, the key here, you touched on it, is like building the balance goals based on the ICP. Also, there's like any number of propensity to buy signals or market signals that you can incorporate. We incorporated technographics, and we had some intent signals in there that we bounced on. Also, like the regulatory signals I mentioned earlier. Key here is like put yourself in the salesperson's shoes and say like, all right, how would they feel if you gave them a report and showed them how balanced they were on intent signals and these other propensity to buy attributes, trying to center on that to get, put the sales rep in mind.
Absolutely. And the next thing we talk about is, here's some more examples of balancing goals on the left side of the screen there, is your locking criteria, which is now on the left side of the screen there. And so one easy way of shrinking this problem and figuring out how to design territories is by figuring out which accounts should not move or cannot move. So locking accounts upstream from moving is a good way to limit the number of decisions that you need to make. So an example of that is through a holdover policy, right? And which is kind of like a temporary account hold or an account lock. But you can also do some simple things. A lot of companies don't want to move any accounts where there's an opportunity, or if you're in a geo model, you might not want to move the state where the rep lives, right? So figuring these things out upstream can be a really important design tool to help you limit the number of possibilities that you actually need to entertain. And so the next step in the process is to really clearly document all of the territory logic that you have today in order to build your design assets. So that's going to take place in the project hub, right? So you need to write down everything that you have going on today, which is your roster, who are your reps, what are the names of the territories, how do we approach hierarchies, how do we think about regions, verticals, so on and so forth. You need to have everything documented for what works today in the current state form so that you can view how to change it going forward. You're going to do that through what we call a State of the Union report. How do things look today from a summary view using your balance goals? And I'll show you that in a second. But Trevor, I know you went through a lot in documenting all of your territory logic and delivered one of my favorite Slack messages of all time here on the left that maybe you can give us a teaser into.
Yeah, it's just like, once all of the territory definitions were documented, the balancing criteria and the locking criteria were documented, and fed into the system. It was like I would get I would look at our territories and be like, why is this count moving, or why is this count not moving? And I would try to look at it and be like, I don't know. Then I had to ask Kevin and team, and they're like, oh, it's because it was what you said right here. Like, this is the territory definition. Oh yeah, that's right. So it was a huge like unlock to like not have to be in the weeds as much, and to trust the process, if you will.
And I do acknowledge that it's a pain in the ass to write all this stuff down in excruciating detail, but it really is helpful. And then
Yeah.
your design assets become these two styles of report, which are again simple, but we just want to give you a lens for what to anticipate. So I said State of the Union report, which is like a summary view, and that's what this looks like. This is a screenshot from BoogieBoard, but you can build the same thing through a pivot table in Sheets. And so it's going to be your reps or your territories on your y-axis, and then it's going to be your balance goals on your x-axis. So without a doubt, saying here is how our equity exists today, not customizing and doing different reports for different stakeholders because you agreed on the balance goals upstream. Let's look at this holistically and see how things are. If I zoomed in, right, I could see some inequity between the number of accounts or the annual revenue, whatever the metrics are. And this is going to be your main report for looking at things in aggregate or holistically. The last report that you're going to use is an account level report, which is a breakdown at the actual account level. Again, this is in BoogieBoard, but this is likely going to be your source tab in a spreadsheet as well. So if you've got all your account IDs, all your accounts, and then you're running pivots off of that, this is going to be the home for that. And you're going to have to do some transformation to make it look good. This is where you're going to do overrides, but this is also where stakeholders are going to come in and just look at things at a more granular level and say, what happened to the Acme Corp account? Oh, we didn't log that opportunity. It changed hands without knowing it. Let's go back and undo that. So you're going to need that report as well for your design efforts. So now you have your balance goals, your locking criteria, all of your territory logic from today is documented in your project hub, and you've got your two reports ready to go. The next step is to actually start designing. You've done the hard part now, and you can design and socialize with stakeholders using a scenario framework. And so a scenario framework just means that you have a method to gather change inputs from stakeholders, probably not just commenting them in a Google Sheet or allowing them to just give you a Slack message. Having something more targeted in the project hub is going to be a more consolidated way with better history to show things. You also want to avoid one-off changes and inputs. And this is why we recommend codifying scenarios. So instead of just having a single account change, now you've changed your entire set of logic and you have a whole new scenario to deal with. So as much as you can keep it focused on what is the goal of each scenario, you can limit the number of versions and designs that you have to deal with. In a similar vein, back to my example of showing all of the balance goals related to a territory, you want to demonstrate scenarios holistically. So if you start doing it just on one variable, like the number of accounts someone has, all of a sudden you're going to lose the view of what the trade-offs are between those variables and what you were trying to do in your design effort. And once you have these scenarios, you're going to socialize them with stakeholders. And the feedback that you can expect back is overrides related to who should be the account owner, like in the example that I mentioned, corrections related to the data. And doing this in a really clean way is just a good opportunity to make sure everyone feels included and is on the same page. And kind of like Trevor mentioned, put everyone's fingerprints on the process so that you can have a really clear design framework. Trevor, do you have anything to add on any of these?
I think just like having a method to gather the inputs and that gives people agency in the process and gives them input. It also is very helpful to serve as documentation later. Like numerous times since we've carved our most recent iteration, I've gotten questions like, "Hey, why did we move this account again?" Or why is this a holdover? And from that, that input or that change log process, we were able to quickly document and quickly reference why it changed instead of like going back into Slack threads and the whole nonsense. It's super helpful.
Absolutely. And so then your goal is going to be, as you move through this design effort, to have a scenario where everything is green, right? You've solved for equity, or you can at least measure equity between reps. And this isn't to say that everyone is going to have the equal opportunity across the board, but you can at least quantify it now, right? So maybe you have reps with different seniority, or you want to change their sort of percentage of opportunity, which then should be directly applied to your quota planning effort. But this is ultimately what it is going to look like. And so, Trevor, I know that you actually then, after implementation, were showing your stakeholders these reports on kind of like a live basis.
Yeah. So there was a problem where, or like we were confronted with the scenario of like, all right, now we have these territories, the territory definitions. Now we need to bake these into like our inbound round robin. So, after we cut territories, it doesn't just all go crazy with inbounds that don't meet territory definitions. So, there was a sales leader who kind of stood to lose some accounts or to lose some like future inbounds because of tightening of the territory definition. So had a meeting with the sales leader, and they were like, we're not really strict on our territory definitions anyway, right? And so we were just like, actually, we are. Like, pulled up a report in Salesforce saying, hey, here's your team specifically, in this specific pod, and just the equity across industries, and it was like just incredibly sharp. And the sales leader was like, oh, okay, well, I guess we're good here. Never mind. So it makes it just, having everything documented and having the balancing tight helps you operationalize these into upstream and downstream systems, and just makes, your job as a revenue operator a lot easier.
Yeah, and they see all the work you're doing, right? In that example,
Yeah.
you gave us these incredibly equitable and thoughtful territories. It's kind of like a fourth grade math test. Like, you got to show your work. So people, you did. I mentioned that one of the things that happens at this part of the process is that you might override. So it's just something to expect. Again, I'm gonna go past this slide for the sake of time. But Trevor mentioned operationalizing the territories. So you've now done this excellent job of designing. You've documented everything. You've had a really thoughtful process. The stakeholders have all been engaged. It means nothing if you don't get it into your tools in the right way. So
Yep.
you have systems involved throughout the process so that you can implement into CRM and lead routing tools. The project hub, the goal of documenting all that stuff is that you can now copy and paste it into rules of engagement. or you can even just use the same document depending on the size of your company. But leave that writing as an asset. And so we're part of the resources I'll show you in a second is we're going to give you both of those. We have the project hub and we have a rules of engagement template that you can use to push these definitions into your organization on a daily basis. You're going to want to measure your performance against these scenarios and against your balanced goals, because territories are ultimately a hypothesis, right? They can be really good, but they're a guess at how the market is going to perform. And so understand whether or not our balance goals were good this year, whether they were good this month, so that we can change it going forward. And then you repeat this process. Some companies are going to repeat this process on a monthly basis. Some might repeat it on a daily basis. Some might do it once a year, depending on the frequency with which you refresh your books. But ultimately, you got to understand what the process is, have the tools to do it, have the documentation to back you up, and then keep those cycles going.
Yeah, Kevin, if I could just interject here, one of the huge values of having all of this documented is like we're ramping new RevOps teammates, and we used to like what we're talking about here. We cut books on like a global perspective across regions, but now we just hired someone in EMEA, and they are going to be focused on EMEA territories. The handoff process was incredibly seamless, incredibly easy because all the stuff was documented. Taking the territory definition, saying, "Hey, here's how territories were cut and balanced," just makes that ramping process a lot easier. Also, it's just not always on you as the territory carver, if you will. You can have more coverage across the RevOps team as you scale.
Absolutely. So, Trevor, in summary, I don't know if you want to just highlight some of the things that were better about 2024 versus 2023.
Yeah. So territories took a lot less time to cut because we had the machines do the work in this scenario. That said, like even if you don't use BoogieBoard, doing all the upfront work, doing all the upfront thinking, hard thinking first will help, streamline the process. So might not take 3 weeks, but it should certainly take less time. Tighter stakeholder alignment. So like before we cut territories, we got, all the fingerprints on the carves before we executed them. So everyone felt bought into the process and they knew what was coming. And then just the territory equity is just I'd say the biggest like shining light on this is we as revenue operators feel really good about knowing that each rep has an equitable shot at hitting quota and making an impact at the company. So yeah, I'd say those are the top three for me.
Absolutely. And so, okay, we had a bad experience in a short period of time. Then you did this good carve, right? But unfortunately, change doesn't stop for revenue operators. So maybe you can give us a little bit of insight into how you see the future of territories impacting Watershed long term.
Yeah. So the vision is like the entire global economy. All of the major enterprises across the world are like mobilized to fix climate change, and they're actively doing something about it. Watershed has scaled the sales team into all geographies and all industries. So we're supporting, everyone in the world and every vertical. And so we'll definitely need some, like it will definitely make our territory carving more complex, but it's a good problem to have. And then definitely like the best good fit accounts are getting worked responsibly by the reps and having a strong pulse on rep utilization, account utilization, just using our resources wisely and leaving no stones unturned, and having a tool and a account and territory data strategy to support that.
Absolutely. We're super excited to be part of Watershed's growth and kind of help you to facilitate some of those goals. Just from the ground, our view of the future as to how we're seeing territories change related to the changing business landscape, changing world landscape is the first is that B2B sales is starting to behave a lot more like manufacturing. Many on this call have probably felt increased pressure over the last couple of years, especially if you're at a software or a SaaS company, to start doing more with less if anybody's heard that term. It's certainly come up a lot, but manufacturing companies have been behaving this way for a long time because they've had this increased pressure, this increased competition. It leads to questions like, how can I automate certain processes? How can I get the most out of my resources? How can I be the most productive possible? How can I use new technology to do it? There's also this huge new wave of account data. This is one of my favorite visuals because it's a G2 graphic of sales intelligence providers in 2014. Here's this same graphic in 2024, right? It's crazy how much account data we now have at our fingertips, and the satisfaction is still really low. It's still early innings. When you think about all this, and then you think about the fact that 80% of the world's data are unstructured, and we don't even have access to them yet, or whatever percentage you want to use. Our processes that are needed to facilitate the leveraging of this data need to be sharp because it's only going to get exponentially bigger. The last is that very specifically related to territories, the role of geography is changing. A lot of companies still want to have on-site meetings. They still prioritize the in-person experience, but they might not focus their teams by geography. So it used to be, if I sold an account to Nike, then I would go down the street and I would try to tell other companies in Portland, Oregon about our success. But now if I sell an account to Nike, I might be looking at other athleisure or other apparel companies of the same size using the same technology that we integrate with across the globe. So territories and how we focus are taking on a total new shape. And so, we decided to build a whole company around it because we're excited about all the different things that are happening. And we hope to facilitate some of these exciting things into territory models going forward. But just to take a step back on the process and the design that we talked about, I mentioned that we're going to have a bunch of resources available to you for all the folks on this call. So we'll post the link. If you go to boogieboard.ai, it's just on the resources tab on the page. The first is that there's going to be a big territory planning guide and checklist. So every step that we went through, we're going to go through in kind of excruciating detail and have a little checklist that you can use to manage your process. You'll actually have the Notion template that we use in our consulting engagements modified a little bit for your own internal use. Again, if you are willing to just go online and drop your comments directly into these Notion docs, we're super grateful for that. The next is a sales kickoff territory delivery template. When you're at SKO and saying, these are our territories, we have a slideshow that you can use in a framework for how you can deliver that. Rules of engagement template that you can use by taking your territory definitions from the project hub, plugging them right into here. That letter, you can tell sales, here's all that we're doing to achieve our Steph Curry prowess is available on that same site. And then we have some best practices in how to work with your third-party data providers to make sure that your ecosystem is humming in the way that you need it to. And then lastly, I wanted to plug a webinar that we're doing with Jenny Guarta on August 15th about getting your data ready for territory planning. That link will also be on the same site, and I'll send it out to the folks on this call. But we kind of talked about this exercise once your data are ready for carve. And so this will be a precursor or a prequel to that, if you will. Jen helped Watershed and Trevor to get their data ready for the experience that we did together. So we want to highlight that work and send it out to the masses. And that's it from a content perspective. Kamala, if there's questions or anything that the audience would like to know, we're happy to do that while we have time here.
Heck yeah, folks.
Kamala, how did you do it?
So I was really fortunate that we were dealing with a known population. So when I was doing this, I was working with car dealerships. There's only at the time 21,000 in the US. And they tend to cluster around major metros. So planning around major metros and keeping in mind drive time. Plus, we used, I think it was Map Anything and spreadsheets, and eventually a rinky-dink SQL type database I set up that was a freemium thing.
Nice.
So do you do territory planning once at the beginning of the year, or territory splits as necessary when hires are made?
Yeah, I can take this one. We do it, the big territory carve is at the beginning of the year. And when we do that, we carve, we have our headcount plan, so we carve territories for the headcount plan. And so as they come on, we just slot them in and assign their accounts. So it's already prepped. That said, like it's not uncommon to do another one mid-year, depending on how the first half of the year went, or if there are any major changes to the business plan or revenue plan, et cetera. So, but the big one is at the beginning of the year for us.
I can just quickly on that too, is like the frequency is usually related to deal complexity and sort of the volume of deals that you expect. If you're a really complex long sales cycle selling to enterprise, usually going to have a longer time to let your territory develop versus if you're on a one call close, really high volume software company, see those accounts turn over a lot more frequently. Reps are disqualifying and bringing in new accounts a lot of the time. And then to your second question about what to do when a rep leaves, this is why you have those balance goals and why you have that report, right? To make it easy for distributing those accounts and splitting them accordingly, or splitting those geographies so that everyone remains in balance. And then you have those things locked already, so you know what shouldn't move. So even though you did that at the front of the year, you can still operationalize it during the year.
We have another question. How long did your consulting engagement last? And Tyler, my friend, every territory planning thing is very complicated. So
Yeah,
don't let that scare you.
that was like our hesitancy as well. It's like, oh, like we have some pretty like messy, we have one territory in particular where it's like overly complex that hopefully will change because it's not super scalable. And so that was one of my hesitancies. But to answer your question, the consulting engagement lasted 30 days. It was a 30-day contract. And we got all the carves done, and that even included like the documentation, all like the territory definitions, the locking criteria, balancing criteria, getting all that documented, and then the BoogieBoard team got to work. And we used their tech to cut territories, balance them, and then assign Salesforce within 30 days. And it turns out our territories weren't too complicated to round that out. Like I thought they were. Turns out we're not a snowflake like every company thinks they are. So yeah, I would push you to challenge that assumption as well.
And you said you had 50 AEs. How many territories?
50 territories.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're ramping into that 50.
So Ken says when one account is 10% of the results, we have to throw revenue equity out the window. Instead, we have widely different quotas. Insights on designing territories in that environment. I have quite a few, but I'll let you guys go first.
Yeah, I think so. There's like an overly granular equity versus equality here, right? Is you want reps to have the same ability to hit quota. They don't need to have the same actual opportunity. That's what your balance goals are going to give you from a quantification standpoint, right? So if one rep has their territory and it's 25% better across these metrics that we've determined make for equitable books, then the quote is 25% higher. So the goal is not to give reps all equal books and then give them the same quota. It's to quantify the opportunity related to a book or a territory and then apply the multiple accordingly.
And part of opportunity calculations are capacity and also so capacity, and then in that opportunity is also coverage and what's already been sold into your accounts and looking at what can additionally be sold into those accounts. So I think it's very fair. I don't see a lot of companies adjusting quotas based on capacity and opportunity. I think that'll change over time a little bit depending on how we can split things up, but exceptions would be where you have deep specialists in certain industries or things that necessitate breaking things up unequally. That's kind of the exception to the rule in my experience. But Kevin and Trevor, curious to hear if you've run into different scenarios or would recommend going against that approach.
Can you say it one more time, Cameron? I'm sorry.
Okay. So What I've seen and don't recommend is we have this stellar rep and we need to give them all the accounts they've already had plus some because we don't want them to go away. Because is it the rep or the opportunity meets capacity?
Right.
When it
Yep.
comes to actually measuring capacity and opportunity in the territory, I think that goes more in line, Kevin, to what you were saying, where you're actually looking at equitable opportunity versus the skill set. And wow, look what I did on
Whoa.
accident. That is special.
I think I can do the balloons. No, maybe not. Yeah, I would plus one what Kevin said. What we did with BoogieBoard is this is really complicated in spreadsheets, but what BoogieBoard allowed us to do was this team's quota is 15% higher. So make sure that the opportunity in their territory is 15% higher or 30% higher, however you want, whatever your sales math looks like. So yeah, that's how we tackled it.
There also might be there's a couple of like tools in your toolkit, and I know we're running late here, is you might have a rep that should have a different role at that point if they're so different in capability from the other reps that you're comparing them to. So that role might necessitate different variables. The other reps might also need to be on a ramp based on what you're talking about, which then again you're using your balance goals to quantify all of this. What is the viability of a territory? And then that kind of is your measuring stick for all these different things.
Wonderful. So I did drop the LinkedIn links in there. Please reach out to these folks in the community. They're both in there. Let's keep the conversation going. And thank you so much, everyone. And Trevor and Kevin for sharing your knowledge and experience. Really appreciate it.